There you go. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order today at 10 o'clock. And first, I'd like to make the recognition of the territories of the Hupatchisitt and Shuswap First Nations, whose territories we gratefully acknowledge to be able to do business here today. And I look out to the screen, and I know where some of our colleagues out there on the West Coast are coming from a variety of Nuu-chah-nulth Nation territories. And we'll make acknowledgement for that too. And then also, as a reminder that this notice today to attendees and delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed for that famous YouTube channel on the Regional District website. Today, maybe in the room, just quickly, board members and staff that are present in the room, maybe we'll just start here to my left.
Hi, I'm Daniel Sam, the CAO for the ACRD.
I'm Terry Fung, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning, Wendy Thompson, General Manager, Administrative Services for the Regional District.
And maybe I'll look to the screen there, and if we can maybe start, Marilyn.
Good morning, Marilyn McEwen, Mayor of Ucluelet, coming to you from the traditional territory of the Ucluelet Nation.
Veda.
Good morning, Veda Siga, Director for ACRD Area C, Long Beach.
And I see Lavonda just come on there.
Good morning, Lavana Mastrangelo, a member of the Executive Legislature for Ucluelet South Government.
Great, thank you. And I know we have a number of attendees online as well that we'll acknowledge. So this morning, if we could have an approval of the agenda, I'll move from the chair to approve the agenda. If there are no admissions, if we could have a seconder. Veda, thank you. I'm going to have to stick my, there we go. the long distance ones and the short ones for reading. Great. Any errors, omissions on this agenda that we want to include? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, motion carried. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the West Coast Committee meeting held on June 7th, 2023 be received. And can I have a seconder? Thank you, Marilyn. Any errors or omissions that were noted? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next on our agenda, we have a 4A, our request for decision, the results of the 2023 tipping fee review for the West Coast landfill. And I see Jenny has popped up on screen, so I suspect she will be taking this one on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we've done a full review of our tipping fee rates. We did this both for the Alberni Valley as well for the West Coast. We've done this just to make sure that all of our rates are appropriate and cost recovery so that we can effectively and sustainably manage our solid waste service. There's a number of minor changes, and I'll just go through the list and happy to answer any questions at the end. We have not made any changes to our base municipal solid waste rate, which is $140 per ton with a $15 minimum. We are looking to adjust the rate that we have for folks who self-haul with bags. We had set it up as a $3 per bag with a $6 minimum, and we're recommending that we change that to a $5 minimum and we charge per bag for $5. This is infrequently used at the West Coast landfill and is really more of an item that we see at the Alberni Valley, but we want to have consistency across the region. So we're looking to apply it here, and we don't foresee much impact on many of the users. We are looking to adjust our recreational vehicle disposal, and we're increasing that from $240 to $280 per ton with a $500 minimum. We are seeing this as similar to, say, mattresses, where we now have a options for diversion, and we see a company that's going to be starting up to look at actually recycling those. That's partly why we're increasing the rate, is again to encourage people to look at recycling and diversion options. We're not making any changes to commercial cardboard or mixed recycling. We're looking to adjust the clean wood waste up to $130 per ton, and that's just to stay in line with our neighboring regions, as well as ensure that we're still cost recovery, as that's actually quite costly to chip and grind and then compost. Organics is still going to be staying at 115 per ton. Partly that rate is set as a diversion. So if you're looking at $140 to throw something in the garbage, we want to make sure that the organics is always the more cost effective and incentivize that. We are also looking to establish a rate of $5 per 20-liter bucket. That kind of parallels the idea of if people want to just bring small loads to the landfill. Because there is curbside collection for residents throughout the West Coast, this rate is unlikely to be used, but we want it to be available for those who would like to use it. We are looking to increase the rate for residential branches to $10 per load. Again, because those can go into the green organics bins, we don't necessarily see this being used that often on the West Coast, but it is a matter of consistency. For commercial branches, we are actually looking to incorporate the commercial branches into the clean wood waste. So instead of having a separate rate for that, it'll just be charged out under the clean wood waste. And for grass and leaves, again, we're looking to delete that item and then include that in the organics rate. We are looking to adjust the medical facility waste rate up to $150 per ton. And the construction demolition waste will stay the same. We also have the coastal cleanup waste rate. We established this as sort of a pilot rate. And this is for cleaning up ocean problems like net pens and things like that, often through coastal restoration, who gets grant funding. And the challenge with that material is that often, because it comes from the ocean, it is so covered in ocean stuff that it is very hard to recycle, even though a lot of the material is recyclable. So we set up this rate so that some material that in theory should be recycled, but there is no realistic diversion opportunity for that, can still go into the landfill, but it is at a higher rate because we don't really want to be landfilling this. The program has been very successful, so we are looking at setting it as a permanent rate that then can be accessed by any community group or organization that wants to utilize that. And then the last one is we're looking to just modify one of the definitions so that because we now do organics processing, we have a surcharge for loads that contain recyclable materials. Basically, it's double. So if you're bringing in a load that has like a lot of recycling in it, instead of paying $140 a ton, you would pay $280 a ton. This, of course, incentivizes people to recycle. And we want to make sure that we're including organic waste as part of that now, that it is a divertible stream. I think that summarizes a lot of details in this report, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Appreciate it. Once again, a clear, precise report. I'll look to the committee to see if there are any questions or comments. Seeing none, I of course have some. And once again, I just want to really commend the report once again. And what I really like is having those two main objectives and goals that are front and center as to why we do this. You know, they're right there. Ensure that the expenses related to operating our solid waste system and maintaining our assets are adequately covered, paramount. And then, of course, as we've talked about often, is building those reserves for those capital projects, including future closure activities of the landfill, while minimizing the impact on taxpayers. And these goals are also strongly supported in the ACRD's strategic plan. If you want to look for reference, 3.2 in that strategic plan. And I do have one question comment. And with the increase in fees, a potential increase in certain areas, I feel it will be important to monitor for any increase in illegal dumping activity. So, of course, needing to have that baseline of what's out there will be important, and then monitoring for any of those changes. And I'm wondering if this is a service that the contractor, Barry Vale, could provide within the service contract, or is this something that we would have to look outside of? I do think it's an important thing just for us to be able to monitor for any potential outside of that, quote, illegal dumping that tends to occur.
Excellent question. So illegal dumping is very challenging to track as far as data, because if it's done well, you'll never see it. But for the most part on the West Coast, We know the area where illegal dumping occurs, and it actually is very aligned with the camping problem. And we do have, I think they're called Redfish now, was coastal. I can't remember their name beforehand, but every year they're doing a cleanup in the Kennedy Flats area, which is where we have a tendency to see that. So the data that we're collecting really is a matter of a cleanup effort. So we go in, we clean it up, and then we measure the volume that comes in. At the ACRD, we waive those tipping fees. We also try to support their efforts because it's an excellent service to what they're doing. But other than that, it is so dispersed and difficult to track. However, I would say that, we will keep an eye on it through that program, which then we do monitor how much volume comes in. And if we see things going awry, or if we need to look at more punitive measures or enforcement monitoring, we can proceed with that. We've been a little bit lucky in the regional district in general, especially on the West Coast, where besides the correlation with the illegal camping issue, which definitely we saw that a few years ago, where we just had quite a spike of material that we had to deal with. We don't see too much of a problem that is probably correlated to the fact that we have a collection system for everyone. So it's not optional, and then some people choose not to do it and then have to make silly decisions. But because we have collection throughout the regional district, people have an avenue to put their garbage. But a really well noted point, and we will keep our eyes on that.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, and I did forget about the Redfish cleanup, of which I participated in some, so I should remember that. So thank you for that. We have a recommendation on the board. I'm going to look to one of our directors. Maybe. Oh, Yvonne, I see the hand up there. Go ahead, please.
That's okay. I was just looking at the coastal cleanup and wondering, that's the section where you mentioned aquaculture can use this as it was the pilot for aquaculture, correct? Yeah. And is there any more kind of, I guess that's all the information, and that was piloted between 2021 and 2022. I'm new this year, so I'm just trying to, is there any more information on that I can kind of share back, or is this the bulk of it?
Through the chair, yeah, we recently, I can't remember how long ago, we did do a more in-depth report on this, and I can actually ask our solid waste team to get some more information for you on it, because it is an interesting, it's a new problem that most regional districts and managers of solid waste are facing, because we are seeing so much material in the ocean. And we work, of course, with Surfrider to do sort of beach cleanups, and we have that. We also have a little pilot that we've set up where the Surfrider Foundation goes in, and we do actually divert and recycle some of that material. So we've got a very layered system that we're trying to set up to manage this interesting waste stream that is new for all of us. Different regional districts are doing different things. So what I might do is I'll ask our solid waste team to pull up some of those past reports and to share with you as well, if that sounds good.
That'd be great. And yes, I'm new to this, and this sounds great. The only part that I was familiar with previously, just in my own experience, was that there is Ocean Legacy, and they help with recycling some of those maybe bigger pieces that make it to Vancouver, and they get recycled and reused. And yeah, so I'd appreciate more information on that to help some areas of my own. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Seeing no other hands raised, would someone like to make the recommended motion? Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you. I will move that the West Coast Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors support the adoption of an amendment of bylaw R1033, West Coast Landfill Tipping Fee and Regulation, to reflect the results and recommendations of the 2023 tipping fee review for the West Coast Landfill.
Seconded by, thank you. Thank you, Veda. I'll call a question if there are no other questions or comments. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Oh, okay. Thank you. Great, thank you for that. Next on our agenda is a request for decision of permanent vehicle parking fee system at the Long Beach Airport, and I know Jenny will be addressing this one as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we did a pilot project last year to set up parking fees at the airport. We aligned the rates with what the District of Tofino had established, which is $3 for 2 hours and $3 for the additional hours, with a monthly rate of, I think, $160. And we had contracted this to Robbins Parking. We had established a monthly rate of $635, and then they get, I think, 6.5% of the revenue. And so we ran this for a year, and we found that in the summer months, we definitely had enough use of the parking system that it was revenue positive. But in the winter, we really just have very little traffic, obviously. It's just seasonal, few flights coming through. We did look at a different rate during the winter months, which was a little bit of a lower monthly rate, and we still found that we were revenue negative at that. So over the course of the 12-month period, we saw a total generated revenue of about $1,200. And really June, due to the road closure, was a peak that might not be what we see every year. So revenue-wise, it's not a big money maker. However, there is very little staff time required because this is all done through a commissioner who works for Robbins, who comes to collect the money. And the real benefit that we saw was that we actually have someone on site who is keeping track of vehicles. So we had a number of vehicles who have been there for a long, long time finally go away. And we also have someone who keeps their eyes a bit on issues with illegal parking, and they let us know if there's concerns. They were tracking the use of the budget rental cars for us. And then we also had a couple companies who requested longer periods for rental, like so dedicated parking spaces. And we decided to actually set up licensing agreements at $900 a year. And so far we've set up 3 of those, which is generating revenue outside of a parking system, but it's still generating from parking, is about $2,700 a year. So due to those benefits, staff are recommending that we continue forward and actually establish this as a permanent system. If the committee supports this, we will contact 2 different service providers and negotiate with them directly, and also try to find a system that's going to work better for what now we know is our basically our average volume of traffic, because in the winter months it's so low. I don't know what we're going to have to look at, but it should be something different than what we have in place right now. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Beta?
Thank you, Jenny. I'm wondering what the process will be for people who would like to negotiate lease rental agreements, and would that be a form that's available online through the regional district website?
Through the chair, that's an excellent question. To date, what we've had is we just, if people are interested, they'll usually ask our airport manager and say, oh, is there something better than this? Because we really only have the monthly rate noted on the website. The licensing has been sort of a thing that we've just set up because based on request. But that's a really good point. And I think moving forward, we can absolutely make this known and available if we do make it a permanent system.
Thank you.
Marilyn, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering, looking at this graph and seeing that we actually use money in the winter months, has it been looked at to make it a seasonal contract with Robbins or whoever it may be, so that they're only being paid during the months that we can make money?
Through the chair, exactly. So when we talk with the companies, they're setting up a longer 3-year contract. We're going to ask questions like that. It was difficult to, if we don't do the service in the winter, we don't know at all what the data is, because we're then not paying for them to give us the information about that. And there may be some drawbacks to not having the system in place, because if we don't, then I worry that we will then see those vehicles that were long-term stay upon staycationers set up again. And so even though it might be a bit of a revenue negative, I think the alternative benefits might be worth it. But again, if we can just look at losing a little bit less revenue, I think we can probably find a better rate that'll work for us in the winter with the service providers through negotiation is our hope.
Thank you. Is anyone else with comments? I certainly support and I recognize that revenue is only one component of this, and it is a net positive. So any revenue is better than zero revenue, and the benefits of having a side benefit of having a year-round beyond the ones that were stated is if we can employ a person in our region in a year-round basis for that, I see that as a positive as well, a fringe benefit. And I think. In terms of the long-term conversation, I was just a little curious about so we would have to go back out to contract conversations. We wouldn't just renew with Robbins. This is something that we do have to go look to other service providers to potentially provide a quote on.
So because the value of the contract is low, through our purchasing policy, we have the ability to basically get more than one quote and then award based on that quote. But our purchasing policy encourages us to always go out to multiple service providers regardless to make sure that we are getting the best value for service. And in this case, because we'll be negotiating, I think it is in our best interest to be having multiple conversations and making each proponent aware of that, because it often does get you the best price and the best value for your money.
Great, thank you. I'll look to the board or to the committee, sorry, for the recommended, unless there is a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Veda.
No, I was just going to make the motion. If you, I'd like to move that the West Coast Committee recommend that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors approve the ACRD staff making the pilot parking fee system at the Long Beach Airport permanent.
Thank you, Marilyn, for seconding. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next on our agenda is a request for a decision, the West Coast Transit service level and schedule costing. And Jenny, I you, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and in fact, I'm going to be handing this over to Shilpa, who's our consultant with Watt Consulting. But you do have a staff report in front of you, and Shilpa's going to go over a bit of the engagement that's been done to date, the results. And the report that is the cover report to the engagement results basically is recommending a medium level of service at a small increase on what we had originally talked about. I think we are recommending that the committee support moving forward with a mid-level service schedule. That'll be about 5,000 annual service hours for the West Coast Transit in 2024, and also requesting that they recommend that the board delegate authority to the CAO for executing an operating agreement with Pacific Western Transport up to a maximum of $608,000 excluding GST. We also have provided alternate recommendations if the committee would like to choose to go to a higher level of service at the end of the report. But I think first I would like Shilpa to basically go over some of those details for all of you, and then is available to answer questions as well as myself.
Thank you, Jenny. Morning, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Shilpa Panikkar. I'm a senior transportation with Watt Consulting. I have been working on this project with Eddie and the steering committee since January of this year. Our team at Watt comprises of a number of folks that have been working on this project, and we're very excited to be here today to present a summary of the engagement as well as some of the more final options for your consideration today. I do have a PowerPoint and I can share screen, or Jenny, is this something that's going to be brought up generally on the screen?
If you wouldn't mind trying to share screen, let's see if that'll work.
Totally. I do have a short slide deck that I'm going to go through. See. There you go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So it's a fairly short presentation. Just going to go through the project from the beginning to where we are right now. We'll talk about the objective of this presentation, some of the project context, what we heard at engagement, based on what we heard at engagement, what we changed, some of the final schedule and routing options, and then timeline and next steps. So why are we here today? We're here to share results with the West Coast Committee to summarize the options for costing that was developed pre and post engagement, and then towards the end have the committee provide direction on a transit schedule that can then be moved forward to the ACRD Board of Directors for approval. Where we started. So we started this project early in the year with the goal of developing an interim transit service solution that can be locally funded and developed with the support of key community, transportation, health, and hospitality stakeholders. We've done this in 2 phases. The first phase done earlier in the year was identifying a feasible interim service solution. We went out and procured some responses to a request for providing the service. And then now the second phase, we basically would be trying to implement the service solution based on the approval of the ACRD Board of Directors. At this point, we're about 65% complete in the project. Engagement, we basically held engagement between July the 26th and the 16th of August, so for about 3 weeks. There was a survey that was up. We did both online and paper surveys. We had about 327 responses in total, which is about 5% of the population of the proposed service area for the project. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through each of the numbers, but as you can see, there was fairly robust response from different communities in the region. Of the respondents, 81% indicated support for the routing and the stops that were proposed, and then about 70% indicated support for the proposed schedule. There was a lot of feedback on the schedules, and we'll go through that in the next slide. So in terms of support, as I said, about totally the proposed routing and stops were strongly supported by about 58% of the respondents, and 23% somewhat supported the proposed routing and stops. There were a few stops that were identified that were to be included in the bus stop inventory. We will take this into account as the service develops further. In terms of trip times and schedules, we had a lot of commentary about trips after 5 p.m. There was discussion about later evening trips. There was definitely a request for weekend service, and then some discussion around earlier morning service as well. And so having heard everything that we did at engagement, generally speaking, we feel that there was support for the system, but there were a few tweaks that needed to be made to the schedule, and so we went ahead and did that after engagement. These are just a few of the comments that we heard in support of the system. We also heard comments that were not in support of the system, and we just want to give you an idea of what we heard. Generally speaking, the comments that were not in support were all centered around paying for the system. There was a concern around paying for a service that potentially people might not be using, and so just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. The final routing essentially connects Tofino through Esta Vista, Taiztanis, and then to Ucluelet, and then trips into Hitatsu as well. In Ucluelet, there was a bit of a change in the routing at this point. It basically ends at the community center, and in Tofino, the bus will essentially do a loop around downtown. In Ucluelet, we worked with the district staff to kind of identify this revised routing. There is the opportunity at that end to turn around the bus in the community center, as well as the ability for the operator to get off the bus and use the facilities if there is a need to, which is why we ended up at the community center. So that is some information about the routing. In terms of what we changed after the engagement, after the results or the comments we heard in engagement, I am going to talk about some of the service options that we want to move forward. But we started with a base schedule of 2 trips in the morning between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., 2 trips in the midday between 11:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., 2 trips in the evening between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m., and only weekday service and no weekends. And so this was the original basic schedule that we provided to respondents to when we sent out the proposal for them to respond and for them to be able to tell us exactly how much the service would cost. When we got the costing back, we went to the steering committee, there was definitely pushback on not having weekend service. And so when we went out to engagement, we included a schedule that had weekend service, and that was well received. Post-engagement, we've added trips on the weekends. We've added more trips to Hitatsu because that was something that we heard about. We've reworked the timing of trips to better serve the 5 p.m. shift going home, so slightly later. Earlier on the engagement, the schedule that we presented at engagement essentially had a trip going back from Tofino to Ucluelet around 4:30 in the evening. And so we've kind of reworked that timing so that we're able to capture folks getting off at 5 o'clock and then heading home. And then we've come up with a few different schedule options and associated costs to ensure that there is a bit of a range in terms of what's done, so that decision making is based on the most or best effective solution, or the most effective solution for the community. Before I get into the schedule and the service options, I just wanted to kind of clarify what you see in this presentation today. There's a bit of a difference. There's a few different or discrepancies between this and what's in the report. I'll point them out as we go through these slides. So in the base schedule, it was year-round service. The expectation is that the operator will provide service from January through till December all the way. And so there's not going to be only summer service or only winter service. There'd be 2 buses in service. There'd be peak trips in the morning. There'd be peak trips in the evening, and then midday service. And all of this would include 2 trips to Hitatsu, 1 in the morning and then 1 in the evening, and no weekend service. This is what came in at about $525,000 at a cost per hour of $127.97 with annual hours of $4,000. So this is what was initially brought to this committee for approval to move forward with. And then we went out to engagement, heard some comments at engagement, and we revised the schedule. So we have a medium level of service that is responsive to what we heard at engagement, but is also kind of being efficient about the usage of resources. And so this schedule is year-round schedule. You have 2 buses in service during the weekday. You have 3 a.m. round trips to Tofino between 6:30 a.m. and 9:30. There's 3 p.m. round trips to Ucluelet between 12 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. And the midday service is incorporated into the p.m. trips. In addition, there's 4 trips to Hitatsu now with this schedule. There's also weekend service, which is provided with 1 bus. There's 2 morning and evening trips, and then 2 trips to Hitatsu, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. And I'll show you the weekend schedule towards the end of this presentation. So this medium level schedule essentially would cost us about $608,000. The cost per hour is $121.50, and the annual hours that this schedule would cost is about 5,000 hours. The discrepancy I wanted to point out here was, I think in the report, the cost per hour is called out as 116.5. It actually is 121.5. So with this service, we are able to provide trips for folks to get to work and get back from work. There is also the ability for school kids from Tofino to get from Tofino to Ucluelet, given that the trip time basically gets for children into Ucluelet before school starts. In the next iteration of this schedule, you've got a high level of service, which is kind of similar to the medium level of service, except that it's got 4 morning trips between 6:30 a.m. and 12:15 p.m. And the midday trips are incorporated into these morning trips. There are 3 round trips in the evening. between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. and 4 trips to Hitotsu, my bad. The total annual cost of the service is $670,000, so it's marginally higher than the medium level of service. The cost per hour is $116.5. The annual hours are 5,700. And similar to the medium level of service, you've got 1 bus in service on the weekends, 2 morning and evening trips, and 2 trips to Hitotsu. The weekend trips essentially are, reaches Tofino at 8:30 and 10:30, and then the evening trips leave Tofino at 5:30 and 3:30 and 5:30, respectively. And so what you'll see is between the medium level and the high level of service, you've got a slightly more improved level of service. All of these schedules are basic levels of service at this cost. That is all that can be provided. But working within the resources, the higher level of service tries to provide better opportunity to folks to travel, up and down in the community between Tofino, Ucluelet, and Hitotsu. In conclusion, if you compare the options, essentially speaking, the responsiveness to engagement feedback is obviously highest with the third option, which is your high level service. And the base level service is, it's obviously a very fiscally conservative basic level of service, but it's not necessarily a very useful service, just because shift workers might find it difficult to use the service to get back from work. They might use it to get to work, but if you cannot use the service to get back from work, you're probably not going to be using the service at all. And so from a comparative perspective, the medium level of service provides a good balance of usefulness and resource utilization. But the high level of service provides you the most value for money spent. It's a relatively high level of service for a beginner system at a marginally higher cost. So it's not like we're saying we're 100,000 more for the higher level of service, but you're able to accommodate most, if not all, of the concerns that were identified at engagement at a slightly higher price. So that's the service option comparison. I'm going to stop here in case the chair of the committee had any questions about what's been presented so far.
Yeah, thank you. I think it might be just in sake of an overall conversation. I think there will be many questions. How much more of the slide presentation is still a bit to be had?
Not very much. We go on to timeline and next steps. And so originally, when we started this project, the idea was to come to the committee in August. We're now into October, and we see this end date sliding a little bit because the contract with the service provider can only be signed after board approval. And so that is going to happen in October. By the time they procure the buses, by the time the operators are hired, it's going to be probably Q1 of 2024, so sliding towards February, March of next year. And so we're slightly behind schedule, but not very much. And then as far as next steps are concerned, once the service option is approved by this committee, it will be brought to the board for approval for implementation. Once that's done, then the contract can be formalized after board approval, and then implementation planning begins. Implementation, like I said, is likely in Q1 of 2024. So that is all I had for you. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm happy to bring up the PowerPoint if there is a need for a look at the schedules or the costs.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll look up to the committee to see if there's any questions, and I suspect there will be. Marilyn, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. I would be in favor of the high level of service because it isn't a lot more money, but it would provide a lot more options for people. But my question really revolves around the last minute delegation we had at the last ACRD board meeting by BC Transit. And it looked to me that they are planning on providing a service to the West Coast starting somewhere in 2024. So just wondering how that's going to affect this contract, because I think this is for the calendar year of 2024, correct me if I'm wrong, and how would BC Transit dovetail into that?
I have Jenny probably respond to that question. Thanks,
Yes.
Jenny.
Yes, through the chair. Excellent point. So the delegation at our last board meeting, we brought forward a report that had our TIPS agreement. So that's a 3-year memorandum of understanding that we established with BC Transit. BC Transit, then once we have assigned that MOU, which is going off to them, they're going to be approaching the province to request the funding. So we're still at the mercy of provincial funding. And as we know, what happened originally is that BC Transit was on board with this new service, which was an expansion, a new service. Originally, the province was supporting still expansions. And then with COVID and external circumstances, they basically put a halt on all new services, all expansions. We are hoping that that is changing, and we are hearing that from BC Transit, but we don't have confirmation from the province yet. So the pieces are coming together. We are layering them. We do hear through our staff contacts that there is such strong support from BC Transit that this is one of their highest priorities for new service expansion for the entire province. And we do need to hear that this is going to be approved by the province and getting that funding, which of course provides a significant subsidy to what we pay with our municipal portion. We did not get a meeting at UBCM with the province to speak about this, but I do know that our CAO is working to set up additional meetings in order to make sure that that message is heard and that we're getting a little more clarity and confirmation that we're hoping to get provincial funding, hopefully in 2024. And that was the plan from both the ACRD and BC Transit. We're just waiting for that last check mark.
Thank you, Jenny. And I'll look to the committee. Veda, go ahead, please.
I noticed that there are no stops between Ucluelet and the junction. And my Long Beach area, the majority of people, which is 50 households, live in and around Millstream. And currently the school bus drops the kids off at Millstream. So if the students are late, with after school activities, I think it would be nice if they could be dropped off at Millstream as well.
Through the chair, I just wanted to address the routing that is that was on the presentation, and the routing that's in the report does not have all 57 stops on there. It basically just has only the timing points, which are the major points that we use to kind of time segments of the route that says, okay, going from Tofino to Tinas, it's going to take this much time. And so there are stops along Millstream. We've just not shown it on the map at this point.
Thank you so much.
Great. Lavana, go ahead.
That was my next question. So thank you for raising that, Veda. And may I get a copy of the overall stops? And is that also is that going to be the confirmed each of those stops when we see them in the other map? And I do like the idea and support the, more value for your money, just with that highest level of service. So I'm in support of that. But yeah, can I get a copy of the map that has the overall stops? And then is that going to be confirmed for sure that those are going to be the stops, or can they possibly change if there was a need to change it?
Through the chair, we can definitely give you a list of all of the stops. And really, what happens now is the implementation planning process, which then, we go through each of the stops. Is it safe to stop? What do you need to improve there? All of that work is basically going to get done now after approval from the board. And so I'd say we have a draft list that needs to be finalized. Been in conversations with the District of Tofino, the District of Ucluelet, with Parks Canada to kind of ensure that what we've identified in our checklist or in our list of stops can actually be the final stops. And so we might not be immediately able to supply you with a list, but once the draft becomes a final, potentially that will be sent out to this committee as information.
No other question? I have a couple of questions and comments regarding, and I want to thank you for a very thorough presentation and the engagement process at those numbers. I think is statistically relevant to give us an idea of what the community was thinking that is out there. I certainly get a different perspective from the constituents that call me directly and or write me directly, and I will touch on that in my question and comments. One of the questions is around the general apportionment methods that we use, and I look to our CFO in terms of the issue stems directly from the, as we can see, what could be seen as a disproportionate cost burden to the Tofino end of the spectrum, where we're looking at a 59% more for the exact same service for the exact same, almost exact same population between the two municipalities that are involved. So it is something that the community of Tofino in general supports the transit without question. And certainly we've been very clear about our support for BC West Coast Transit Service in the region. But it does come down to, at this point in time, some questions around the costing of that and how we equitably share that costing. And one of the questions that I've already touched base with, but I would like to hear clearly there, we're using that 50-50 mix of population and land improvements. And I'm wondering if there are other tools available to the regional district that are available to more equitably look at ways of a portion of those costs in a way that would be, I'll be frank, a little more palatable to the taxpayers on my end of the peninsula. So maybe I don't know, but I'll look to Terry to see if that's something that could be looked at.
Definitely. So I'll just touch kind of on the background of how we got to this apportionment method as well. So when this bylaw was established, many methods of apportionment were discussed. The land and improvements or the property value taxation is the default mechanism in BC for taxation. As a local government, we do not have the ability to tax on income or sales of items outside of our area. So I guess our tools really are parcel tax, ad valorem tax, or property value tax are the kind of two main tools. So there's a taxation portion, which even still in this bylaw is still on the basis of property value, even though the apportionment. So the apportionment method is how we're dividing it amongst the participants. And so we had a great deal of discussion as we went into this, because the majority of our bylaws, and I would say the majority of regional district bylaws across the province, are still on a property value apportionment method. But there was a lot of discussion, partly because the two treaty nations wanted to be part of the service, and they have very small property values on the roll at this point. And so there was a lot of, I think we had discussed 6 main options. There was population only as an apportionment method. There was improvements only, so not taking the value of land, just taking the value of the improvements of each of them. We talked about parcel tax. You can basically make any combination that is able to be calculated to apportion your things. But it was decided at that time that the 50% population, 50% land improvements at least move that dial a little bit, and it did recognize the high values of the assessed values in Tofino at that time. Every year those assessed values change. In some years one area gets hit more than others, just partially based on sales of the area for sure. And so it was what the method was that went to the electorate for part of the establishing bylaw process. So that's kind of the history of it. How we would change it would be we could come up with a new apportionment method if desired. And we could do that through discussion. But in order to change it now that it's established, you need 2/3 of the participants to consent to bylaw amendment change. And then at that point, we would also have to send it to the inspector of municipalities. They may or may not want to weigh in depending on the change. But there is a provincial step involved in that as well. But it is 2/3 of participants need to agree in order to change a mechanism. And then I guess the other item that I'll talk about we kind of remain silent actually in our report, is the sales aspect of it. So the fee box revenue will be an offsetting cost. And I would say that as we develop these cost estimates, we've potentially underestimated the amount of revenue that we may generate, but because we don't know the ridership, we wanted to be cautious about the amount of revenue we anticipated. And so the number could end up being slightly better depending on the ridership ability and ridership and usage of the service. And I think I'll leave it at that unless you have further questions.
I do have further questions, but thank you. That does help me. The going through that process at this point in time would be onerous, to say the least. And I'm always cautious around the fees conversation in the sense that I never want fees to be a disincentive for ridership. And we know clearly that the data indicates those fees can be a detriment to those that may utilize the service. In fact, those who may need the service the most. So I'm very cautious about how we approach that fee modeling. I am very much in support of the principle of that higher level of service. There's no question that the better the level of service, potentially the higher uptake in usership. But at this time, and with the estimated cost increase, I can't. The West Coast has had a very challenging few years, as I'm sure everyone at the table is aware of. Beyond COVID and the coming out of COVID, we've also had this year particularly some very challenging conditions that we're all aware of here, and we'll continue to see the ramifications of those coming forward. So I've had very direct feedback from businesses and individuals that are finding challenges in coming to grips with the fact that there are been increases in all of those, and it's death by 1,000 cuts, and it's not specifically the amount of this particular one; it's the cumulative effect that they're feeling. And once again, I will reiterate, the West Coast is very supportive of the transit service. So at this time, though, and I'd also add that. With the first year of this funding, with the conversations with the province that are coming forward, I would like to be cautious in our approach because we may be changing how we implement the service potentially. There's been some good indications from the province that may well be the case. So for this first year, it pains me to say this, that I'm comfortable with that base level of service, recognizing many of the engagement process and understanding clearly the implications of just staying with that base level. My only caveat to staying with that base level, and I didn't see it indicated because it wasn't costed out individually, it's very clear to me that we would, in that base level service, which did not include weekend service, I think would be a critical component. I don't know if we can parse that out in terms of those cost estimates, include base level with a weekend service addition that was identified in some of the slides that had been brought forward. So it's tough for me because I would, in principle, like to support that. But when I look at what that increased level of service would mean directly to the taxpayer at this point in time, it is hard. It is very hard for me to be able to move forward with that. So what I'd like to see is the ability for us to maybe look at what an additional service to the weekend portion of the base level of service. And then we'll have the ability within that year to look to what the province is going to be doing. We'll be able to monitor the service at that base level and have a review after that first level of service year. And we'll have real-time data to be able to utilize in terms of ridership and in terms of if there is some anomalies that need to be addressed, that might be the time to do it. So I have a motion that I had put forward, but I might want to just check to see if that ability to have in a costing proportion that weekend service, that limited weekend service, added to the potential cost estimate. And I'm not sure who I would be able to answer that particular question.
Chair, I just wanted to jump in and address your concern. We are definitely able to cost out the weekend level of service. It would be the basic level of service that we've identified for both the medium and the high level of service. We can cost that out separately and add it to the $525,000 for the base level of service. It would kind of bring the costing to, I want to say, slightly closer to your medium level of service. But I'm not sure, but as I see it, I think it'll add about $50,000 more to the $525,000, which brings you closer to the $600,000. But we'll confirm these numbers at a later point in time.
Great, thank you. And I see all of the advisory there, and if I were to, I think I saw Marilyn, Lavana, and then Veda, and if we could go in that order, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I feel strongly that ridership is going to be crucial for this service, and a base level is not going to satisfy a large portion of the population that would use that service. So myself, I am still strongly in support of the high service level because it's not that much more money, and it will give a lot more opportunities to a lot of different factions of the population.
And Lavana.
Okay, a couple questions, and also considering the conversations with some of the communities. I know there's Yatluta recognized, but there's a couple other outlier communities that would be using these services, which would come from the Tofino area, like Ahousaht and Opatisat and Hishkwit. Those communities and some of their leaders, and even my community, Yatluta, and then some of the other communities, sometimes they will purchase packages and provide them to their citizens. And I know that's possibly, I don't know if it'd be a lot, but is that part of the cost analysis, is considering how much buy-in would happen through communities, and then also some of the other stakeholders in the areas that might find this in a good service? Yeah, I'm wondering if those are considerations in how we can look at cost and covering costs. And then this also includes the purchase of the 2 buses, or this is just the running of the buses?
To the chair, so these costs represent a total operating cost, which includes lease of the buses, because this is an interim service at this point. It does include all the wages for the drivers operating the service. It includes all the maintenance on the vehicles. And so overall, it's a total cost of the service. As Jenny mentioned, we've not taken into account revenue at this point. It is hard to estimate what the ridership could be. BC Transit has taken a stab at estimating what initial ridership could be. We could use those numbers and come up with an approximation of what the ridership is. But at this point, these are total numbers that are provided to you, not net numbers, and so do not take into account revenue. It is definitely possible, as we develop the fare structure, to have monthly passes identified. It's definitely possible to have packages identified that could be bought by either organizations or governments to ensure that their community members are well supported by the transit system. And as far as lowering costs are concerned, I think once we have approval of the schedule that we want to move forward for implementation, conversations between the ACRD and potentially even the business community and some other institutional organizations could happen in terms of like, tourists that could be supported by this, right? In terms of in Banff, for instance, there's hotels that are signed up for transit. Those hotels pay directly into this transit service, and their guests that stay at the hotels have then free passes to the transit service. But these are already prepaid by the hotel. So it's not free service, but it's an agreement that that hotel or the resort has made with the transit system. And so there's a number of different options possible as far as lowering costs are concerned, but those conversations are yet to happen, just so that we are able to like let them know about the level of service. And obviously a more attractive level of service would be more useful to a number of different folks.
Yes, exactly. There are a number of stakeholders in tourism, in other industries that would buy into this and support either communities or their workers. And the leasing from who? The buses are leased from the district or the region? The overall, or the buses are coming directly from BC Transit?
So
Sorry. I was just hearing
The
something from another conversation that I was trying to put 1 and 2 together. So
the service provider is providing the buses. Who they're leasing from, we aren't sure, but they're a big company, they're a big service, they're a big operating company, and have fleet that they can pull buses from at this point. And so what their costs have provided to us is a lease fees for the vehicles. We've identified the minimum specifications for the vehicles, and we leave it to them to figure out where they're getting the vehicles from.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. So I'm sorry, Veda. I apologize. You're dark and right out and on your screen. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. From my perspective, I think it's really critical to get buy-in to the ridership. If we have a service that is sort of limping along, people are not going to buy into it. They're not going to use it. I think it's important to go out strong, have really good coverage. And if we find that the schedule has no ridership in certain times, then we can pare back. But I think it's really critical to go with the high level of service just out of the gate to get the ridership and get the buy-in.
Great. Thank you. And I appreciate those comments towards this first potential service that's being provided. And obviously I'm not going to reiterate the points that I find are important for consideration, but hearing the rest of the committee, and I suspect there will be a movement towards that, I would seek at this point then at least a conversation around what has been recommended by our Watts Consulting, as well as with staff in terms of the recommendation. And I'm looking to CIO. Please comment.
I wanted to just bring forward something for conversation, because this is committee as well, and seeing we have all the right players in finance here as well. It's the other tools, the potential to explore other tools for other sources of revenue, and whether or not under our bylaw this is something that we could still do. But when we look at shifting some of the costs away from households, for me, some of the obvious areas to explore would be under parking. I think everyone has some public parking. Can we put, a dollar more under the parking and then transfer those funds into public transit? Could we explore that angle? Could we be looking at park fees? I know we have Parks Canada here. And again, one of the biggest challenges that we face is people moving from Ucluelet or Tofino to the park. Can we add a fee to the national park fee that could then go in to offset some of the transit costs? I don't understand the intricacies of the RMI funds or whether or not something like that can be used, but can they? And I'm just listening to your comments, Mr. Chair. It's just I know that Tofino does have the RMI funds, and that's why I asked whether or not, you could help relieve some of the burden while keeping the same formula, but offsetting some of the costs perhaps on the Tofino side. They're all areas to explore. I put it out because this is the right table to discuss and just to see if there's something there that we could look at.
Thank you, Daniel. I can quickly comment on RMI, which is very specific in terms of its funding abilities, and I know there are conversations within the RMI community. I think it's 14 of us there around looking at ways that the RMI could be utilized in different ways. Those are ongoing discussions, but as it stands, I will never say 100% certain, but 99% certain that we would not be able to. We've looked at the utilization of RMI in many different aspects of funding, but it's certainly, to be able to look at all the tools to offset some of those costs, absolutely. And I see we have Parks representative on there. I'm sure they're not able to say, yeah, absolutely, but it might be a discussion that we can have with Parks Canada as well as the parking revenues. And I was just maybe in terms of are you thinking of specifically Parks Canada revenues around parking? We certainly we have parking revenues, but we've already a bylaw of what those would be spent on. So I know that wouldn't be available from the Tofino end of things. But yes, I'm 100%. And I don't know in terms of the forwarding discussions and our timelines for moving transit. I don't want any major delays in getting this going by Q1 of 2024. And then I maybe look to staff to see the investigation of those potential funding sources outside of taxation, if that time frame would be enough to give enough time for staff to be able to look into those and be able to report back before we made a recommendation to the board moving forward.
I'd have to sit down and discuss with Jenny and Eddie and Watts Consulting just to see how we could go about doing that, but or what has already been done. It's just verifying that. And just as you were speaking as well, as also thinking, to explore. Typically, what we do is approve a certain level, and then we could explore other ways of reducing those costs, right? Because what we're trying to predict is, here's the worst case scenario, we're paying for it all out of households, and we have very low revenues and ridership, and therefore we have to make sure we cover the costs. Every revenue that comes in makes it a better scenario because it reduces the overall cost moving forward. Along those lines, that's a conversation we'd have, and we'd come back to you. And just thinking about what Director Mastroianniello brought forward, we could also explore whether or not we could do advanced sales of prepackaged tickets, either with the nations or with specific businesses. If you're a co-op and you want to have your employees take the bus rather than drive in, can we, do some sort of incentive where if they prepackage and pre-buy 6 months at a time and give those out to their staff, that they get a discount, we get a guarantee of revenue that we can plan around, a bit of a win-win as opposed to buying it at the till, so to speak. And I don't believe we've done that yet because we've just been looking at creating service, but I'll turn that over to Jenny to see if we've explored that yet.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I think that I know that this is a challenge for payment, and looking in the future, this is our interim service, and we know that BC Transit, or we're very, optimistic that BC Transit is going to be coming in as a partner, which will then put it into a better funding model that is more in line with what we're used to. The other thing I wanted to remind the group is that, one of the benefits we have actually seen in going through this process and taking control of setting up this interim service is that our actual cost estimates have been more cost effective than what BC Transit's original estimates are, which is great because now as we move forward with this service, when BC Transit comes on, hopefully they will, and it only makes sense, jump on board with the interim service and then fund that, which means that we see a benefit as well as transit. We all see a benefit in a lower, generally more cost-effective system. One of the, I love the discussion about looking at different opportunities for getting revenue and those kinds of things. And really getting into that implementation detail is something that we would like to do and we can do. But I think setting the level of service is sort of the key step that we're looking at getting moving forward now from the committee. So whether it is the base level of service and medium level of service, high level, like what is that service level? Moving forward with that. And then staff will be able to, once we have that clarity of what the service and schedule looks like, we're going to be able to then, we can aggressively go out and look at other funding mechanisms. We can talk more about our service agreements with other First Nations, as well as the revenue sources that will be coming in from resorts, and then look at what that sort of longer revenue implication is going to look like. I hesitate to, like, from a staff perspective, I would hesitate to recommend to the committee that we go back and then come back again, just because, you know, we have done an engagement with the community. We feel like we have good feedback on what we want. I think it would be prudent to select the level of service now and move forward with getting that contract rolling, just because, as Shilpa mentioned, you know, we have buses that we need to procure and other things that we don't want to delay the service. And then we can start to run sort of parallel systems where we have the operating company working on basically getting that service set up, and then we can look at the other revenue sources and making those numbers smaller. So from a staff perspective, I think our recommendation stands that either we look at moving forward the medium level of service, or based on the feedback from the committee, a higher level of service. And we would be happy to then come back to the committee with more information and recommendations for the next West Coast committee, but also looking to get a resolution to take to the board basically at the service level. So we still have a lot of work to do, and it's just hard until we have the service level set to get into the details of all the other revenue sources, I suppose.
Thank you, Jenny. And Marilyn, go ahead, please.
I would be willing to make a motion at this time unless there's other questions.
I'll look to the rest of the committee. I see no other hands being raised. Go ahead.
I will move that the West Coast Committee recommends that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors approve moving forward with the high-level service schedule of approximately 5,700 annual service hours for the West Coast Transit Service in 2024. These should be moved separately, I assume, or together.
I'm looking right now. There was. Look.
I guess together.
Just do it together. And then, through the chair, you can do these together. They're even though they're separate, they're kind of a package, and yeah, we'll go from there.
So Marilyn, maybe we can start with the that the West Coast Committee received the engagement summary report for information, and then we can read off all three of them, and then we can second those if.
Okay, so I'll move that the West Coast Committee received the engagement summary report for information. And I will move that the West Coast Committee recommends that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors approve moving forward with the high-level schedule of approximately 5,700 annual service hours for the West Coast Transit Service in 2024. And I will further move that the West Coast Committee recommends that the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors delegate authority to the CAO for the negotiation and execution of an operating agreement with Pacific Western Transportation for a maximum amount of $670,000, excluding GST.
Seconded by Levana there. I do have a comment at this point, so I don't see any others. If there's I have a question with it on the table now, and it's probably to the CFO. What would be the tax implications coming forward if we approve this service level with the amount that had been indicated? So would we be seeing that increase without looking at all those potential other revenues that could come in to offset those costs? Is that what would we be taxed for? And that's what we'd be seeing on the apportionment part of our ACRD bill?
So on page 17 of your agenda, there was kind of the three levels provided for each of the areas. So with the service level 3, the high level, the requisition impact, it was $360,358, for example, for Tofino. I will say that that was a number of assumptions, like that's off of our 2023 assessed values, which of course our next taxation year will have a new role. The other thing was that was a full year, just to give you guys the overall picture. As we go through the implementation here this fall, we'll have a better idea of what our implementation date is, and we won't tax in advance if we know we're not going to start before March 1st. Say we'll be doing that for a portion of the year. And then we'll also have an ability to talk about some of those other revenues that potentially can. But this is based on the full $670,000 operating contract of that high level, plus about, I think my estimate was around $65,000 for like staff time and other operating costs that are outside of the contract. So those two items collectively.
Thank you. Look to the committee, seeing no other hands. I will call the question. All those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. I think, oh, we've got one more here. No, we're in the reports. Yes, there we are. First one being West Coast landfill land gas assessment, of which we did. I got questions on that one. And it looks like Jenny, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is just being brought to the committee for information. We did our review, which we are required to do every 5 years. And based on the model, we have determined that the West Coast landfill generates approximately 378 tons of methane per year in 2022. This is below the requirement for landfill gas capture. So at this point, we don't need to start planning on gas capture. As we know, we're doing organics diversion. So as we move forward and in 5 years, when we're required to do this assessment again, we anticipate that that will actually go down. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Look up to the committee and I don't see any. I had, it was just a geeky question, so I'll refrain from that. So we can move on to the next part, the next report, the West Coast landfill and commercial organics on board.
Thank you, Chair. And again, on this is more for information for the committee and valuable information too, I might add. So now that we have our residential organics collection system in place, we've got the processing facility up and running. Our next and final step is to bring on board all of our commercial sources. So we've just put together a plan for that. And this is for information for the committee, is that we'll be doing an info sheet and sorting guide by the end of the month, and then doing an open house and engagement with all of the businesses and haulers in November, making sure that they understand sort of what is the processing system. We want to make sure that we're not getting a lot of contaminants, which is a big concern for us when we start to open it up to the commercial haulers and commercial businesses. So we're going to be doing a lot of strong education and frequently asked questions and working with them. And then we're going to start to accept commercial organics at the facility. And then we're going to do some post-implementation. So we anticipate that we'll start to see some problems, and then we can start to mitigate those and work with any of the individuals to modify behaviors. And hopefully we'll have an excellent quality stream of organics coming into the landfill by mid to late fall 2024. And then the last step will be that we're going to promote and establish a ban on organics at the landfill for everyone and start to remind people that you have to compost. It is no longer optional. So happy to answer any questions on that as well.
Let's see any from the board. I do have a question, and it relates, and I will go back to the last report as well. In the last report, and it was a question around a report will be required. The federal GHG report will be required, and I was looking at that and looking at the work that we've been doing in those organic diversions, and I was thinking, is there no appeal process for the implementation, because we are going to be implementing, we have already started and we will be moving towards commercial, which I suspect we will be, I will hope be below those thresholds. There is no appeal process, I suspect, for those GHG federal requirements, and I suspect that will cost us money, even though we are moving clearly in a direction that will be reduction of those methanes within there, or the GHGs within our landfill. Is this true?
Well, Paulo's on board and he can speak more to this, but my understanding is that with the new federal ones, it's more about they just want the information at this point. So they are also tracking greenhouse gases because they have their own objectives that they are trying to meet. And so for them, they want to make sure that they're also getting the information. And so it's more about data sharing than it is another set of regulations at this point, and that we're still going to be under the provincial regulations. That's going to be our threshold on whether we have to do implementation of gas capture or not. But as far as reporting goes, I actually think it's not a bad thing that there's more reporting requirements for these greenhouse gases, because this is the important one, and landfills are one of the biggest producers. So did I miss anything, Paulo?
No, thanks, Jenny. I think you captured everything there. It is literally going to be data sharing is what it is. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Great. Thank you. I'll look further down into the agenda now. We have our section where we have our ex officio members updates, and I do see that we have our Pacific Rim National Park folk here. Is there anything you'd like to share with our committee today?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple items to share with the committee. We have some good news. We'll be adding line painting to Highway 4 throughout the Long Beach section of the National Park Reserve. So that should be happening. We've actually done some of the side roads already, and it was proposed to happen today down Highway 4. We'll just see how the weather forecast is, but in the coming days, the center line will be painted from the south boundary to the north boundary. As you've all noticed, the BC Hydro work continues. So this is the twinning of the lines to provide power to the treatment plant and upcoming treatment plant in Tofino. So that work continues. Will continue into the foreseeable future. But they're doing quite a good job from our purview of having small sections of work being completed, and delays are no more than 5 minutes from what we've seen. So, but there is single lane alternating traffic and flagging on all sides. Third up is just, this is similar to many of the reports I'm hearing from Tourism Ucluelet and Tourism Tofino, is that our visitation has been down significantly since June. Especially with the Highway 4 closure in June and then the impacts from the Cameron Lake fire. Our numbers are down to probably the lowest they've been since around 2014 for June, July, and August. So hopefully we see a little rebound now that the road is fully open, and we can see some increase in our non-peak season visitation. And the final is just a comment, just a shout out to all the communities, but the multi-use path now being completely open from all the way from downtown Tofino to downtown Ucluelet. So a shout out to the ACRD team for completing the last portion, and I would love to recommend that potentially the members of the committee we plan a ride together sometime in the coming months, or maybe we want to wait till the spring for better forecast, but I would love to throw it out there and all of us go together from one end to the other. And that is my report, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. And well, I think maybe, yes, a little later, maybe in the spring into early summer, in terms of getting everyone out there. But I appreciate it, and I do. Well, it was only a 1 minute delay this morning when I drove down to Port out there while they were doing the clearing, and I do want to touch on. Thank you for the updates in terms of the impacts around the numbers coming to our region, and it was. I think I spoke to this. Around the questions of the individuals and the businesses that have been impacted by, and this just corroborates what I'm hearing anecdotally and certainly seeing the data on. So thank you for sharing that information. I look to to see, and I don't see on my screen anyone from House It Nation. I'll look over to Wendy, and I don't think there is.
No, there's no representation from housing.
And I'm looking to Tlaloquiat, and I don't see our usual suspects on my screen. And I'm seeing negative as well. And Heshquit, I don't see any of our friends from Heshquit on screen here. With that in mind, I don't believe there is any late business. In terms of the question period, I will look to Wendy to see if we have anyone joining us online today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do not have any members of the public attending today, and there was no questions submitted to our email address responses.
Well, that brings us to the end of our day, and I will look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Marilyn. Oh, did you have a question, Marilyn, or you just the motion?
I did. I think we have to receive reports A through C before
Thank
we
you.
adjourn.
I appreciate that oversight there. So if I could, I'll move from the chair that the West Coast Committee receive reports A through C. Thank you, Veda. All those in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Now we can move on to the agenda number 8. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you, Marilyn. Seconded by Veda. Thank you so much. All in favor? Thank you, everyone, for joining. Motion carried. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and take care.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.